Right, this will be the final piece. The materials I used for this one were a ruler, an HB retractable pencil, a 3H pencil, a white gel pen, an eraser, and a white colouring pencil. This one's like a fine watercolour pencil, but yours doesn't need to be water soluble for this. And I also use a good quality tracing paper to transfer the line work to the finished stock. I'll put the final piece in the corner as a reminder of what we're working towards. So the first thing I do is map out the front faces of each letter. Here I've got an O, an I and an exclamation mark, and I'm putting them at a slight angle to each other to give a bit of life and dynamism. The next step is to give them some depth, and I use perspective to really make the letters pop, and I'm giving them depth at different angles, which emphasises the dynamism from the last step. Next I draw an ellipse, which will be like the spotlight on the ground plane, and then I draw the boundaries of the light beams that come from the two light sources. There's one in the exclamation mark and the other one's in the O letter. When I first came up with this idea, I only imagined like one light from the O, but then I decided to add another to get that cool sort of triangular shaped overlap where the light is intensified. And now I'm drawing my figure. I practiced for a while on a separate piece of paper to get this right. And then I draw the shadows cast by the lights, and you can notice that the shadow on the left is longer than the shadow on the right, because the light source is lower on that one. You think of like long shadows when the sun is setting versus short ones when the sun's high in the sky, and it's these little details that help to suggest the position of your objects within the environment of the drawing. So that's the main drawing done. Now it's time to transfer it to the grey card, and there's two main ways to do this. You can place a piece of carbon paper between your finished stock on the bottom and then your original drawing on top, and then draw over your original drawing, and it will transfer carbon lines to your finished stock. Or you can use this method, which is more of a pain, but I haven't got any carbon paper, so I turn my original line work over and then place a tracing paper over the top, and I fix that in place with a bit of Scotch tape. Then I turn on my lightbox and trace over my lines in reverse. Once that's done, I remove the tracing paper, turn it back the right way and lay it over my finished stock. This means the pencil lines I just drew are facing the finished stock. And I fix that in place with the Scotch tape again. And now I use pencil pressure to transfer the lines to the card stock. I'm just scribbling over the lines that I just drew. It doesn't have to be too precise. So now I've got my line work down, I'm going to render it in markers and pencil. Right, the next thing is to lay down some basic tonal values. I'm using promarkers for this. The front face will all be cool grey 1, which is a basic light grey, just to differentiate them from the background by one level. I've learned to trust promarkers to even out as they dry. I mean, it's tempting to keep going over and over an area because it never quite looks even while you're laying down the ink, especially on this type of card stock. I mean, marker paper is much more predictable to use, but it is a bit thin. So now I use cool grey 2 for the sides of the letters. For the sharper areas I use a sharp nib, and for the larger spaces I use the chisel tip. With the promarkers it's definitely best to work as fast as possible so that you don't load the paper with too much ink. Because it does bleed across all your sort of boundary lines. So now I've got the basic tonal values down, I'm going to switch to pencil, which I've got a lot more control with. I use an HB for the darkest areas, and you'll see me switch to 3H for the mid-tones. And this way I can get some nice smooth gradient blends. I also use the HB retractable pencil to refine some of the outlines, because those are just transfer lines and they're not that precise at this point. During this stage I also pick out the shadows that are cast on the letters by other letters, for instance like the shape of the O on the side of the I, and there will be shadows cast from the I onto the exclamation mark too. And this all gives the piece depth. It's like another way to make the individual letter forms interact with one another, and it helps the piece become sort of more coherent. So now I use the gel pen to fill in my light sources. I'll essentially have three tonal levels for the light in this piece. I'll have the solid white where the light emanates from and where it focuses on the ground, like the spotlight. I'll have medium white where the two beams overlap, and then I'll have a light white for each of the beams. So I use the white pencil to render the light beams, and I want this to be fairly uniform shading. And now I'll fill in the medium white where the two overlap. And finally I use solid white for the spotlight to really make the figure pop. As a finishing touch, I'm using like a highlight on the edges of the figure to really pick it out from the background. Technically there should be a highlight on both sides of the figure because there's a light from both sides, but optically I think it looks better just on one side. So here's the final piece. I'm pretty happy with it really. So there you go. Let me know what you think in the comments. Bye. Cheers.